Introduction to the Wholeness Paradigm Project. 25 years ago, I was a member of a spiritual organization that had a president that wanted to change the organizational culture from fear to love. For many years previously, it was identified that the tenets, beliefs, and the rules, systems, and structures of the organization were very controlling and manipulative, and were based on fear of retribution of the members that did not follow the rules and the tenets. Some of the leadership of the organization felt their core message and mission weren't being fulfilled. Their membership dwindled and they wanted to reinvent themselves. They wanted to be more holistic in practice, not just in words. The new president was sympathetic to their beliefs and was an organizational change expert. He immediately identified the existing dysfunctional culture of the organization and lack of new leadership abilities as being the most important issue that needed to be addressed. He outlined an organizational change template that utilized tools and techniques outlined in learning organizational models and the disciplines thereof. One book that was used as a training manual, so to speak, was called The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of a Learning Organization by Peter Senge. I took the organizational change process to heart and began an in-depth, intense study of the new organizational change documents that were produced for the organization that focused on building a new culture. I thought this was a fantastic idea and the best way to move the organization to a new level. I was so enthusiastic with the new direction in learning that I became a change advocate. I learned everything I could possibly learn about learning organizations and process systems and different types of leadership models, especially servant leadership. I studied the Fifth Discipline Handbook and Systems Thinking. Systems Thinking is the fifth discipline that ties together the four other disciplines that include mental models, current reality, shared vision, and personal mastery. Within each discipline exists suggested tools and techniques to facilitate change objectives. And then tying all these disciplines together would result in an organizational change that would create the foundation for a new and dynamic learning organization that was adaptive and expansive. During this process, I became a process observer, an outlier, wherein I befriended several of the change leaders, including the president of the organization. I took the new tools and techniques and leadership skills that I had learned and began to conduct learning workshops in my own local group. Eventually, I became president of my local group and began to implement the organizational changes. This is when all hell broke loose. Certain individuals, unfortunately, did not want any change whatsoever, and these people began to slander my character and discredit me. I soon found out that this same process, slandering and character assassination, was happening at the major headquarters at the organization, and the new president was actively being stripped of his power and influence through certain campaigns of deceptions. This is a big story in and of itself, but suffice to say, he was forced out of his position by the old ministerial guard who refused to change the culture to a new paradigm. The old leadership simply did not want the change. I was extremely affected by this discord and myself resigned from my position as the president of my local teaching center. Approximately 1 year later, I was at the Chicago airport and ran into the very man who was the president and who had somewhat become an acquaintance of mine. I asked him to truthfully tell me what had happened and why he left so quickly. He told me he was sworn to a confidentiality clause, but said with tears in his eyes that I would not believe how terribly the ministers and the old leadership had treated him and his family. He said they lied and slandered him and his family. Basically, he said that they feared the loss of power and control into the hands of the membership. They decided to stay in a fear-based paradigm, he said. They did not want to move into a more love-centered paradigm, the very concept of what they wanted to implement in the first place. And he said they had no interest in becoming adaptive and resilient. Their mission and vision, based on an old worn-out paradigm of fear and power and control, was all based on strong ego-based intellects. Several months after my meeting with him, I began a very deep personal re-evaluation of my own life and way of looking at society and our culture. And that initiated a certain degree with my study of the energetic heart. During that time, I studied the energetic heart and the heart math techniques in Boulder, California. This was the study and the science of the vibration and frequencies of how the human emotional system, when focused more in the heart, could produce outward changes and have influence in our environment. In essence, it began an awareness for me on how integrating the mind with the heart in a coherent behavioral process was the key for any lasting change in any culture. We need to become a more heart-centered culture that integrates the virtues of the heart with the information of the mind. I could see that our culture needed to become more holistic. We needed a culture change. By now I had remarried, had more children, and worked hard to build a new business, a new life, and a new house. During that time, I had my own challenges and, of course, my own journey in consciousness, like we all do. 1.5 years ago, I broke my back and suffered a serious trauma to my spine. I'm fortunate to be able to walk and function still, but I'm now partially disabled, so they say, and limited in my physical activities. But I can write and speak, so this is now my new work. My experience in organizational change and desire to see a new culture that integrates the human behaviors of love with systems and structures that have these behaviors as fundamental principles for a new culture is what I'm now engaged in. I'm calling this new culture quantum culture. 6 years ago, I wrote a book called Quantum Culture and a New Humanity, Visions of the Future. The book was basically a primer for a body of information called the Wingmakers material that I had engaged with as the next step of my learning about the heart and cultural evolution. So to continue this work, I've initiated a new podcast series where I will discuss the idea of the wholeness paradigm. I have a vision for this platform that will be revealed and built upon as we engage in this work of building a new culture, a quantum culture. So please join me as we journey together in consciousness to create a new paradigm, a wholeness paradigm. My first wholeness paradigm podcast will outline and detail our format. Thank you.